How do you feel about action RPGs like World of Warcraft? Are you a fan of those?
I was an alpha player in World of Warcraft. I put in like years of game time. I was a huge fan of it and I played a lot of it.
I only recently started to play World of Warcraft. I know that's weird, but I immediately fell in love with it. I think it's a really addicting experience and I enjoyed the game a great deal. But I do get tired of clones that come out that try to emulate what World of Warcraft does to a certain extent. This game is falling short because it's so early access. Hey guys, this is Brax.
And this is Moriarty.
And Signs of Darkness tells you that it recommends to play with a controller, and I cannot state to you how important that is in this game. Because if you try to sit down and play it with a mouse and keyboard, you're not gonna have a good time. The game is not optimized yet, and while the general concept of what they are doing, I understand it. I've played games like it before. You have a Dark Souls-esque UI where you can hotkey up to 4 abilities, use those. You can change your equipment, have swords, shields, fight your opponents, and of course, wander around an open world, take on quests, meet NPCs, and do all of that good stuff that people love to do in MMORPGs. The problem is, most of the things in this game don't work properly yet, and what I mean by that is the camera gets a little out of whack when you try to lock on to targets in combat. Your companion that follows you around does not interact with anything around him, and during the middle of a fight, he just stands there and does absolutely nothing. At times, one of my spells just stopped working and I didn't understand why. I had the mana, I had the MP, I had to restart the user interface to get it to work, and it just feels really buggy and too early for them to even have released this game, especially with a $20 price tag. It's just simply not ready. I can't overstate how much I mean that. This feels like something that they are maybe 50% of the way finished developing, and it's already out there for people to play, and I get that. They certainly need the feedback, but at the same time, I would have encouraged them after playing it to wait a little longer before they put this out there for their potential players to experience.
Or to give a greater discount on the title. I mean, $20 is the same price as a PUBG, so you're not necessarily buying something that is expected to be perfect, but it needs to be playable. And if it's not playable, then people are going to remember that. You're giving them an expensive investment in a title that may never be completed that isn't good.
Absolutely, and I'm not saying that this game can't be good in the future, because I think it has potential, and there are many games like this in this genre that have done very well, but as it is right now, there are so many things that plague the actual gameplay, like the mouse sensitivity is too high and it makes it difficult to move your character. There were several times where I got stuck on things like cracks in the ground, and then at one point I just simply walked into a staircase for 30 to 45 seconds before I could even go into the local inn. And the one thing that annoyed me the most, and this is something that perhaps I'm being nitpicky on, but I don't think I am, the way that you control your dialogue options in conversations, which is a very big part of this game, is talking to NPCs, is by using the W and S keys. The problem is, once you enter into that conversation, those keys still control your character's ability to walk. So as you click up and down using W and S to change the dialogue options, your character constantly turns backwards and forwards. Like he turns around and looks at the camera, then when you click W, he looks at the character again. So he's basically walking around in a circle as you're trying to have a conversation with NPCs. It's that type of bugginess and poor optimization that makes me think, what were you guys thinking? You should have worked on this a little more before you brought it out.
That's really funny, though. That's the exact kind of bug that you expect from early access. And I gotta admit, that doesn't even offend me. I'm okay with having a bug like that. But if it's this kind of broken, where there's so many little problems that you feel like should have been caught in an internal playtest, that's what leads you to think that this is paid beta testing.
It certainly does feel that way, and I don't think that's fair to people to have to spend $20 to be a part of that process. This is the type of thing when people hear early access and they get a little turned off by it. It's this sort of lack of preparation that causes people to feel that way, in my opinion. I don't want to continue to say negative things about this game other than it's just not polished enough to even be on the market yet. But based upon the other things that I see, like the abilities, the equipment, There seems to be lots of different ways to customize your character and upgrade and level up. There are plenty of NPCs to talk to and lots of quests to do. It's a really nice open world, and you are not going to be at a shortage of things to do once this game is in full release, but until then it's just going to be a work in progress, to say the least.
So when I think about a game like this, I think about maybe 4 different things that are important to me, and the first has to be the combat. So how is the combat?
The combat itself works, but the animations for casting a spell just don't feel good. They feel kind of boring. All he does is like wave his hand around. It doesn't feel dynamic or make me want to get involved with it. And the biggest problem that I had with the combat was swinging a sword. It feels really sluggish, and it feels as if that sword would weigh 100 pounds because it just takes a long time for him to make the swing. The sound effects are okay once he makes contact, but the tracking system as well, once you're swinging your sword at someone, doesn't feel right. Like it'll run past characters because you have to hold down control, or maybe it was alt, I can't remember which one. You have to hold down a key that will lock onto a target, and that's how you fight them. That doesn't necessarily work well with the sword itself because of how the swinging mechanics work. So the gameplay is in need of improvement as well. I will say that the spells seem to work better than swinging your sword though. All in all, there's potential there if they fix it, but right now it's really simplified, and it just feels, like I said earlier, like a Dark Souls UI thrown into a World of Warcraft game.
Okay, maybe I don't want to do combat. Maybe I'm the type of person who, like me, is instead going to focus primarily on economic growth. Is there an economy? Can I become a trader? Can I get really rich?
I am actually not sure if you could become an actual trader and take that on as your primary role in the game, but I do know that there are ways to make money by talking to people and doing quests, and you can trade goods. So think of something like Skyrim, where you can go around and barter with different people at different shops. Like that sort of thing is certainly there. But as far as a specialization of, you know, developing a character from the ground up to be a good trader and to be a merchant in the game, I personally didn't see that sort of specialization offered when I created the character. For me, the character is going to be the same every time you play it at this point, because all I could do was customize his appearance. I couldn't really select any special attribute, skills, perks, etc.
So you don't even have the traditional D&D stylings of fighter, mage, and thief. It's just one guy.
Yeah, it's just one guy who seems to be a conglomeration of all of those. And once you level up your abilities, I'm sure you can take that route and say, I want to concentrate on getting some better healing spells. Or, you know, maybe I want to concentrate on leveling up my strength or my dexterity. Those sort of abilities are there, and you can level your character up. But it doesn't feel like it's a specialization. Like I made the comparison with Skyrim, where people, when they create a character and start a new game, they say, this time I'm going to go through and I'm going to be a stealth archer and a thief. And then another time you might be a mage and an alchemist. I don't see that being in this game to that degree, where you would feel that level of ownership and specialization of your character. It just seems like you're going to pick some abilities as you grow throughout the game.
Fair enough, and if that's true, that's totally fair. If they want to go on that route, I'm okay with it, as long as it's made really clear up front that there's none of that customization or specialization, though I'm sure in this type of game they want to do that later on. I'm a little disappointed about the economy because, quite frankly, even in World of Warcraft, once I hit level 60 in the original, the very first thing I did was become an auction house baron and start making tens of thousands of gold. That's always been the thing that I enjoy the most. When we talk about Skyrim, I spent time clearing out entire dungeons, multiple trips to take everything out of the dungeon for the money, because I enjoy being the economic baron. That's always been something that I enjoy in those games. But you did touch on one thing that I think is the third facet of any of these type of games, which is questing. So how does the questing feel? Do you feel like you're doing something in The Witcher, where all of the quests are really natural and organic, or is it something a little bit more prosaic?
The questing seems to be really open world and sporadic. From the beginning of the game, you were thrown into a crypt, and it just introduces you to another guy that becomes a companion of yours. But I did not even notice a reason for the side quests to be there, other than I just started doing them. There is a main quest line, and that made sense to me, but in other games, when you go into a town, it seems like you get there through the main quest line, and you're introduced to that town and how things work slowly, and all of a sudden you don't even realize that you're out doing side quests. It just sort of happens naturally because you ran into someone and then you decided to go do that because it sounded interesting. This doesn't necessarily have that feeling. I simply wandered around until I found some quests because I wanted to try them out, but the quests don't seem interconnected and it didn't feel as natural. Like you said, it isn't like I felt like, oh, I'm doing a side quest and I didn't even realize it, because that's what I get the most out of with RPGs, is when I'm taking down different paths and everything doesn't feel linear anymore. That's impressive to me, and it makes me want to spend a longer time in that open world. I will say some of that is there, but it's certainly not as strong as I've experienced in things like World of Warcraft or Elder Scrolls or any of those other types of games like that. The questing itself works fine. You have icons that go onto your map like you would typically find in these sorts of games, so they're sound mechanically. It's just they don't really feel that great from a narrative standpoint, and it isn't something that made me invest in it.
And I can understand that as well. We're talking about an indie developer, so we're not going to be seeing anything like when CD Projekt Red decided to spend hundreds of hours refining their quests, making sure that every zone was organic, and they even took food out of cupboards if it didn't make sense to have food there. So I totally get that, but you did touch on the final thing, I think, that really makes an RPG something worth playing, and that is the story. Is the story compelling enough to make you want to go through all of the pain? Because I tell you what, there have been some RPGs that I've played where I didn't particularly find the mechanics to be that strong. I didn't find the characters to be that compelling, but the story drove me on to the point where I had to know what happens. I have to finish it. I have to complete it. I have to be a part of it.
Sadly, this game also isn't doing an A job in that department either. It's pretty simple from what I can tell, that you were thrown into this crypt and there are monsters that are out to get you and kill you, so you have to overcome them and kill them, and then I suppose that's your main goal for the game. But this story isn't something that immediately drew me in. Like Dragon Age has a similar story in that regard, right? But you also get introduced to the Grey Wardens, and you get introduced to all this different lore early on in the game that makes you really involved in it, and it feels like a whole nother world that's been crafted from the bottom up. And like you said, it reminds me of how creative Dungeons and Dragons can get, and that's an important part of RPGs, is to have that level of depth and detail and creativity in the stories and the characters. I simply have not gotten that out of this game yet, and I'm not sure that I'm going to at this point.
Well, it sounds like it fails on all four of the major tenets of an RPG for me. The combat isn't particularly fluid or fun, the economy isn't built up, and there doesn't seem to be any real focus on it. There's no incredible questing system, and the story is lackluster at best.
All of those things, unfortunately, are true. I will say that I think the gameplay is fixable. That's something that they can continue to work on in development. I think the quests can be worked on as this game continues in its life cycle. But there are a couple of things like the story that I'm just not sure how well that's going to fly. I don't see this as being memorable in the same way as those larger, more famous titles that we've already mentioned were. It really felt like a game I had already played before, but just wasn't as good as those games. I mean, it's an open world RPG with all of those traditional elements that you have, but it's not doing anything special. And on top of that, it's very alpha, and it just doesn't feel like it should be on the store yet. They should have worked on this more before they put it out for early access.
And I feel like that's probably going to have to be all that we can say about it, because it's not a complete finished product and it's being reviewed by us. That is unfortunate. I would love to say that there's a fantastic RPG third-person type of game out there that you can pick up and try, and it's early access and it's affordable and it's priced correctly, and you can pick it up now and love it, and you'll be able to grow with it as it gets better. But it just doesn't sound like this particular title has what it needs. I am constantly going to have to go back to the fact that if there are tiny bugs in the game that should have been picked up in an initial playtest, even by a developer, such as conversations having the character move, it makes it feel like it is a paid beta testing. And that is something that I just do not at all think you should support as a consumer. I think it is a anti-consumer practice. That plus the fact that it's missing all of the other stuff just makes me not want to recommend this game at all. On top of that, I am noticing some outrageous loading times in this game.
Absolutely, you beat me to it. The loading times are just horrible. It prevents you from being able to get involved, again, because you're waiting 30 to 40 seconds, maybe longer. It feels like it's at least 30 seconds every time you wait on a loading screen. In other RPGs that I played, once you've entered an area like an inn, a tavern, or whatever it might be, and you leave that area and you come back, the loading times are cut down. Not in this game. Every single time you go into a new area, even if it's already been loaded up before in the past few minutes, you are still going to have to wait that really long time again, and it breaks the momentum. Every time I would start playing and I would read the quest and like, okay, let's go do this quest, I spend the next half minute or maybe even longer thinking, and it just gets really bored sitting there waiting over and over and over. So surely that's something they could fix as well, are the loading screens, because that just breaks the momentum of the game in a way that really doesn't appeal to me as a player.
And optimization is definitely something that I wouldn't expect from an alpha, but on top of everything else, on top of the fact that there are all of these other small, insignificant bugs that make it feel like it's paid beta testing, on top of the fact that it's missing what I consider to be the 4 core tenets of an RPG, it just doesn't bode well for me. And so, for that reason, I am not recommending this game.
As you could probably guess, I'm not either. Not at this point and not in this stage in the development. Certainly not for $20. It is worth keeping an eye on, though, to see what happens in the future, because I do like to see games improve and grow over time. I'll be keeping an eye on this one because I think that they can do a lot better than they have. Very far underneath the surface of this, I see potential, and I see a type of game that a lot of players love, and it's one of the most popular PC gaming genres on the market. I would say just keep working on it for the developers and for people that are interested in it. Wait a few weeks, maybe even a few months, keep an eye on this, and at that point, maybe you can revisit it, but as of now, absolutely no way that I would recommend this.
So there you go, guys. That's Signs of Darkness. If you like it, like it. If you don't like it, don't like it. But if you did like it, why don't you watch another video up there in the corner? And as always,
we'll see you guys on the next one.